All right. Just before I get started in this, I'm front loading what is not actually an advertisement. Apologies. But if anyone pulls anything away from these videos, it would be cool if it was this. If nobody has seen Richard Lewis's content on YouTube, he is a professional journalist and caster for sort of the esports scene, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota, that sort of a thing. Um, Absolutely fantastic. That's some of the content that we sort of aspire to provide for Reforger. And then also, if no one's seen, if you go into YouTube and type in Last Free Nation, absolutely fantastic, high caliber. A lot of those guys have kind of worked with each other. Really fantastic. It's really important if you're looking at where the competitive scene for Reforger could go or should go. Really everything's downstream of, professional paid $1 million, industry esports anyways. So it's really important to be able to look at different areas within competitive gaming to see kind of how the better people or the bigger people are doing it. And then that should kind of come down to games like Reforger. So highly recommend. Those people don't know I exist, but if you pull anything away from these videos, it would be sick to get more people into that, because a lot of that content really should stimulate conversation and thinking about how to do things better. So, anyways, hello everyone, and welcome to the Camo Net Podcast, episode 12 for this one. Absolutely blowing through these. I am your perpetually toxic host, Bambi Sandy, speaking the important truths so you don't have to bear the weight of having said an unpopular thing first. We're with a group called Camo Net Supremacy, covering Arma Reforger and the competitive community for the game, though we'll be expanding to other games in the genre, such as Hell Let Loose and Squad. If you're already involved in the competitive scene for those games, we'd love to have you over. Or feature some of your content sometime. When we expand into covering those games, we'd actually prefer putting a spotlight on people and content that's organic to those areas, as opposed to cutting into things with our stuff. Those scenes have their own casters and their own lore and personalities in the space, so we're not trying to edge any of those people out, if that makes sense, if we don't have to. If you represent a team in the competitive community for Arma Reforger, or if you're with a group of people that would like to get into the competitive scene as a team, join the Discord using the link in the description below. Likewise, if you're participating in Season 2 of ARCL this year, and you're struggling to find people to fill slots less than a week away from the season starting, it's probably because nobody knows who you are. Recruiting posts and generic AI posters can be made by anyone with often little effort, so what you might need is an interview. Join the Discord, reach out, and we can give you an opportunity to advertise your team effectively. Just keep in mind that we do not ask softball questions. That's to say, if there's a reason to ask specific questions about a controversy or something like that, we're not going to shy away from that. We're not going to try to start shit if you don't have anything there, but already had a couple of people that kind of refused doing interviews because we took that stance, which shouldn't really make sense. But the Discord is meant to stand as a neutral space for any team or individual that fancies themselves as a competitive player, regardless of skill level, hour count, or opinions on various topics. We'll have to see after this episode who's honest enough to label themselves appropriately. There's no association with a particular team, tournament, or server. You can use the Discord as a backup networking tool to keep in touch with like-minded people, for scheduling scrimmages, or for generally talking about things going on in the scene without fear of being banned or censored for wrongthink. If you join and don't want people to reach out to you in direct messages, by the way, simply adjust your Discord settings to ignore messages from people who aren't friends. Also, though, joining a Discord for something like this, only to not interact with the community, some pretty psychotic and elitist shit, to be fair. There are 30 other Discords to idle in and stroke your pathetic ego, so maybe give the Discord invite to your guys. Don't join yourself if you're going to kind of take that stance. Nobody cares that you're a squad lead for your pathetic team. Anyways, Camo Net Supremacy is a collective media project and community for the scene and won't ever host its own tournament. Camo Net Supremacy is essentially a haven where the actual competitive community can thrive. Little teaser for the video later. The idea is that Camo Net Supremacy, obviously it's just me doing the content right now, but the idea is to bring other people that want to comment on the scene, other teams and stuff like that, especially once, tournament seasons are going, whatever the fuck people want to call them, events are going. So it's not ideally just me, it's sort of just an umbrella where people can talk about the scene and the game in general. Don't correlate necessarily me with only Camo Net Supremacy. Our content doesn't feature crazy overlays or editing purposefully, so aside from technical issues and bits on the front and back end of the recordings, we leave everything in the middle for transparency, gives everything a good, honest vibe, especially for the interviews, so that way everyone kind of knows and comes into things with the expectation. We're not going to edit people to make them look better than they are. We're not going to edit people to make them look worse than they are. So, springing, this is my joke for the episode, springing into the episode faster than your body ragdolling from a Jeep that you flipped on nothing, we've got a rosy but narrow set of topics this episode that'll hopefully help some people and teams navigate the space. Personally speaking, I also have a big announcement at the end of the video, not Camo Net Supremacy, but just me. If I were to give this episode kind of a one-word theme, it'd be refinement. So getting into the episode proper, what are we doing here? And then, who's we in that? Where's here? There's some big terminology differences going on. Obviously, if I'm taking this journalist thing seriously, I'm always talking, spending most of my time throughout the day, even if I'm not at the computer, just popping up the phone, talking to people from different teams and people that want to do different things within the scenes and listening to people's goals and aspirations and stuff that they want to do or address. So I talk to a lot of people. I think that I have a pretty good pulse on the quote-unquote scene. And from talking to lots of different people, I consistently find that we're all working with different terms, different labels. We're all calling ourselves this one thing or part of this one thing, but it's very obvious that we're all actually talking about like 3 different things. So we're going to address that with this episode. Technically, I had already kind of touched on this in like episode 2 or 3, but not a whole lot of people have kind of gone back to watch those episodes. It's significantly, funny enough, like quality disparity between kind of like these newer episodes and those. So if you don't want to go back to watch those, totally get it. Gonna kind of rehash everything in this episode anyways. So what is the difference between competitive play and being a competitive player? Are people, for instance, that enjoy playing something like Call of Duty competitive players if that game encourages competitive play? If you go to the gym twice a month, are you a bodybuilder? If you replace a board in a fence, are you a carpenter? So the aim of this episode isn't to split and otherwise unified player base. It's to point at the Emperor that isn't wearing any clothes by stating that our labels are wrong. Titles are earned, not given. You don't just call yourself a competitive team. Not ideally. The same way that you aren't a carpenter if you replace a board in a fence. You're a carpenter if you care about the craft, buy into it with your own time and tools, and care that carpentry continues as a practice, as a hobby, as a profession. You want other people to get into it, and you'd probably lose a piece of yourself if like all the trees were fucking gone and you just couldn't work with wood anymore, right? So we'll start with what even is competitive play? Well, competitive play is as simple as it sounds. It's just the act of play, competitive in nature, which sounds like I pulled it up on Google, but that was just my annoyingly philosophical mind putting it in that college format. For something like Reforger, this should just refer to balancing or features, right? When you think of competitive play, your mind should just go to like 10 on 10 between two teams of equal skill, and that's competitive play, right? You think of sometimes think of it as an after the fact term, right? You played a good match on a pub server where like both the US and the Soviet team were really like engaged. You had some good back and forth. There's sort of like the same number of people on both teams, maybe some armor play and stuff, back and forths with helicopters. You would say that that was a competitive game. But that's not a competitive game, if you get what I'm saying. If the definition is that shallow or simple, this has to represent just replacing a board in a fence, like from the carpentry reference before. Just because you did a thing once doesn't mean that you're a carpenter. Again, someone that plays Call of Duty isn't a competitive player, and neither is some random guy on your team in pubs that has a good KD ratio, right? There's more that goes into that. So if that's competitive play, what does it mean to be a competitive player? Being a competitive player is being a carpenter or a bodybuilder, right? It's not dabbling in a singular aspect of the game for a stint, a match or two. It's following the scene, interacting with the community, engaging with what you enjoy in pubs, but kind of wanting more. It's wanting to find other people who enjoy what you enjoy about the game, doing what you can to keep the thing going. You shouldn't expect a competitive player to hope. They might expect, but you wouldn't expect a competitive player to hope that the game will die. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, if we've identified what the difference between competitive play and being a competitive player is, it should be really easy to underline who falls into the competitive scene: teams, groups, tournament hosts, and individuals who speak to a shared, pure philosophy, not centric on any set of maps or even probably modes or weapons to use, right? Just the philosophy. And it should be centric around, specifically for Reforger, what does that philosophy kind of take the form of? What's the idea? Well, it should be centric around team or group-based PvP, getting better at the game, a connection to the process, or buy-in, basically, and wanting to keep the thing going, keep the craft going. If you're just here for ARCL Season 2, and then you bounce out, you're and your group of guys decide that, it's not really for us. Would you expect anyone to call you a competitive player? Or if ARCL ends mid-season, and you're like, whatever, who cares? Are you a competitive player? Do you have a competitive team? Just because you were able to put 20 people together for a set of events doesn't mean that you're a competitive player. Helping your family fix a table doesn't mean that you're a carpenter. So, I just like to list out, because this is kind of what I've aggregated from my interactions with people throughout the quote-unquote community, right? If you don't care about the community, if you elect to avoid talking to people or teams, if you advocate for removing other people or teams from the community because you dislike them, not on anything steadfast or solid like they were cheating or half of their members were hacking or because they DDoS people, talking about just because you dislike them, you think they're too toxic, or so you don't want them to participate in your tournament. If you offer nothing to the community, but you always have your hand out, you always take whatever you can. You never offer to help out with events. You never offer to help out with seeding. You never offer to help out with playtesting. You never offer advice to people or coaching, but you'll happily take prize money. You won't give in for prize money if you wanted prize money back, and yet you want prize money as a reward, or you want a weapon skin, or you want some accolade for winning a tournament, but heaven forbid you put anything in, anything at all. If you don't care about whether there are scrimmages or tournaments to participate in 2 months from now or not, if you wouldn't care less about replacing a competitive event with a PvE one on your team's calendar, for instance, if you don't think it sucks, I'm not speaking to, like, obviously they had a reason to push it back, but, like, if you aren't bummed that ARCL had to push the start of the season by a week, and you just, like, replaced the event that was going to happen that weekend with, like, an AI-based PvE mission or something, right? That's kind of what I'm speaking to. You aren't in the competitive community. You really aren't. You can attend the same events, and you might be able to offer your thoughts in some Discord or in the discourse on a subject, but your opinions and positions mean substantially less than you think it does, if it should mean anything at all. Because again, if all you do is take, and at no point do you give, on one hand, how is that fucking healthy? And on the other, how would anyone respect you? And this kind of ties in, I didn't write this down, this kind of ties into the heart of why I dislike and want to hedge against coalitions, like what ended up happening in Squad. Because you're talking about, like, groups of people that couldn't be fucked with, like, training, they don't really care about getting better as a team. We're just going to take the best 20 people from across, like, 30 of the teams. We're only going to come together for this one match, and when we get the win, we didn't put anything into it. Most of the time, when you make a coalition, you actively take away from every other team, because now you're taking the top players that would be engaged with their own teams and pulling them somewhere else. And they're like, yeah, whatever. But anyways, that isn't to say that I believe that outsiders or outside teams shouldn't be allowed to play in matches or scrimmages. I think if you've got a friend group in real life that's like 10 people and you just all happen to play Armory Forger, you're trying it out and you want to sign up for like a little 10v10 tournament bracket or something like that, I think you should, even though you have like no, you're arguably not in the competitive community, I don't think that you should be barred from matches or scrimmages, right, in a tournament or in the lead up to a tournament. But I am saying that, you know, stuff like ultimatums or even just general opinions on like how we operate can't ever be listened to from these people. If a big milsim team or an org is demanding a specific selection of weapons for a tournament, drop that team immediately and make a public post on some Discord or forum or shared space and give the community an opportunity to laugh them out of the fucking room. Two groups, because this inherently kind of means that there's the people that I'm saying are the competitive community and that aren't the competitive community. Two groups that operate in the same space shouldn't be a big deal, but I'd argue it will be. And I'd argue that you can already see that in how the public servers are handled, right? Who's more likely to get kicked or banned from a server? Someone that's a little braggadocious and toxic about their skill in a match? Or the guy that has 500 hours in the game, which isn't a new player, right? That digs down half the modules on a base so he can rebuild it to look how he wants. So that way he can put up all the sandbag walls and surround, the first aid tent and the living quarters and like razor wire and stuff. Who's more likely to get kicked? Who's seen as more of a draw on the server? Now, that all being said, what do we do with this? If there are now two separate identity groups that people are sifting themselves into, if anyone gives a fuck about this content anyways, how do you handle that? And then what if you're struggling to understand which group you're in? The first point to mention with that is those teams, groups, and individuals that are influencing tournaments, matches, or culture to run contrary to like what I've outlined. You weren't ever going to get those people to compromise on anything to begin with. These are the people, even if they haven't made the mods that we're playing with. These are the people that see that you're using one of their mods and they send you like a fucking cease and desist letter. They're like, hey, you're not allowed to use that. That's the same entity. That's the same underpinning philosophy, the same energy. They'll run their events. We'll run ours. We shouldn't aim to undercut their dates or events. And also, we should expect that they'll undercut ours. We should stay honest and open to anyone who signs up for a tournament or scrimmage. Kind of like I said, if you've got 20 real-life friends, but you've never actually participated in a competitive tournament before, you all just happen to play the game, I think that you should be able to sign up for the tournament. My specific philosophy on how bracket seeding and like the delineation of skill should be handled means that that team won't play the second best team in the tournament, but I don't think that you should put a barrier or a limit on like who can sign up for the event. The more teams that participate, the better, really. But also, so we should be open and honest and expect that they'll do the opposite, right? They'll the more likely the people that we're talking about in kind of this neo-competitive or non-competitive group, they're more likely to ban you or limit involvement in theirs, especially if we're explicitly saying like, hey, we recognize that we're not the same, we're in like two different player groups. They're more likely to remove you or limit your involvement if you kind of come out and say that. So no shade to anyone that doesn't like immediately want to say that, you know, because they're like, okay, well, you know, if you're not even going to pretend to enjoy our fucking, you can set down AP mines in our tournament, we haven't removed those because that's realistic. Yeah. Um, you and the kind of philosophy, it might seem like a conflicting statement where I've said, you know, that these people's kind of opinions and perspectives shouldn't really have an effect on where we're at with headspace and decision making and stuff with the actual competitive community. Well, it's easy because you can load into a server for tournament matches without being involved in the community, right? Like, that's effectively, you know, 7/10 of the ARCL Discord, where like the general chat and stuff like that, that's not where decisions are made and shit. You just have a team rep chat or whatever, right? So like if you're holding a tournament and there's a bunch of teams that aren't actually like part of the community, then explicitly run that Discord environment as like an austere, you know, blank. It's not for the guys, it's just for, you know, one team rep. That's cool. That, you know, as long as you're actually billing it as that and you're not fucking lying and saying that it's like its own community space, if you don't give a fuck about any of that stuff, that's fine. You know, if you want to run that like that, and maybe that's what it would need to be on our end. So secondly, if you're a team that's on the fence, nobody should really be forcing you into either camp. If the vibe or intent for your group or team is ambiguous, that's cool. You know, if you're just looking to sign up for events here and there, though, like I said, you know, tournaments and events from our side of the aisle shouldn't be restrictive to anyone. But again, if you aren't interested in caring about the direction of competitive or the competitive community for Reforger, then don't try to be in the community. Don't try to join that. Just do the tournaments or the events and then fucking peace out and then come back when the next one happens, you know? Don't try to LARP or say that you're like one of us. Because it's really fucking obvious when it isn't. I've had 2-sentence conversations with people where you could just tell that like you're playing a different game. You're talking about different things. And then thirdly, this isn't a traditional breakup. Everyone has their own relationships to manage. Everyone has their own Discord, basically. Nobody should be telling you how to run your business or about who you can and can't scrimmage, or that you have to use our Discord or this thing over here to run your scrimmage setup through. What this should represent, however, is a desire for our own tournament hosts, our own side events, content and culture that speaks to us, for us. Obviously, I would put myself in this camp, but I don't want to be the lone person doing this. I say that basically every episode. I should be evident in how often I want to interview people and do team content and stuff. If anyone wants coaching on how to do like casting or culture content, throw me a shout. The scene for the competitive scene, the scene should have like 3 to 4 tournament hosts that service like a myriad of events throughout the year. Well, you know, the beginning of spring, you know, it's tradition now, a couple years running, that there's like just a little fuck around, you know, 5-on-5 pistols bracket where, you know, 30 teams, you know, sign up Maybe some teams or organizations just want to send their best five guys. Some teams or organizations want to actually split up into like two or three, quote unquote teams for that, so all their guys can play through it. And it's just fun dicking around and like, playing with a pistol. If no one's ever done it, take your body armor off, just throw yourself a pistol and a bunch of mags. And just try to play the ordinary game that way. You have to make like completely different. It's like a palate cleanser. You have to like completely change how you move in the game and what you set yourself up for and stuff. It's fun. And then, towards the end of spring is sort of like the lead up to this tournament hosts, start of summer event. And then, at the end of summer, another tournament host does their thing. And, the year should be chock full of these fucking events. It's one of the things that kind of bugged me about Squad towards the end when I stepped away was you would end up with only actually, there was a period in time where there were tons of fucking tournament hosts. But if you were, for instance, in like North America, there were tons of tournament hosts across the globe. But for your region, time zone play and ping plays a lot into that. So for your region, you might only have like 2 or 3 events that happen a year. That's a lot of fucking downtime, especially since like usually it was spring, summer, and then one at like the end of summer or the beginning of fall. And then you just do fucking nothing for like fall and winter. There should only really be, especially since the competitive community is really young, everything is downstream of tournaments. Everything that you do in a scrimmage context is to get ready for a tournament, basically. So if you have rapid fire a bunch of fucking tournaments and you don't really have like a big train up period in between this tournament and that tournament, that's not actually a fucking negative. Not really. That's just a better driver for you doing scrimmages or doing little internal practices and whatever the fuck. Or maybe there's so many tournaments and stuff that you don't actually really feel the need to hold scrimmages and tournaments and stuff. That's a good problem. That's not a bad problem. So ideally, if there's 3 to 4 tournament hosts a year. When I say tournament hosts, I don't mean 3 to 4 bracket events, right? You can have a tournament host that holds 2 or 3 different type, pistols only, and then ordinary, AAS, and then, like an HQC or whatever, but it's still like that one tournament host, right? So, I'm sure that my definitions are going to be fucking different from that, but I see the label of tournament host or what is a tournament just as like who's running the thing, not like, well, ARCL refers to a specific, mode or an idea or a concept. The ARCL is just the organization that's running this particular bracket at this particular time. Anyways, ideally, the hosts are talking to each other and making sure that they don't have dates that overlap. But even if they don't talk to each other, that's still good for the scene. That's still better than only having one thing that happens a year. My team, as an example, again, this is an example. I don't have a team, just an example. Might not have the numbers to commit to a bracket that runs through the start of summer. People have kids, people, do school, or, people, their summers might start at kind of different times. People might not have a summer, people work different jobs and shit. But we might be able to make one that runs through the end of summer that has a little bit of a later start date. And even if those tournaments, kind of run times are pretty close together, that actually might be worthwhile because there's all sorts of things. It's just, you can want to participate in a thing as a team, but if you don't have the fucking yes votes to like, yeah, I can show up to that, then you don't get to fucking participate. Well, the difference between, not being able to do anything this year and being able to do, 2, 3 events that are just at like odd times or whatever, that's huge. If people call you sweaty, if you're ever in a voice channel with people that are making fun of your playstyle without their knowing, for instance, if you actually kind of prefer being a lone wolf, because you find that when you assume, oh, there's a guy, we're on an objective, there's a bunch of guys that are looking in that direction, they got that, I can focus on this thing here. If you find that you always get burned by that, so you prefer, when you spawn into an area on a public match, for instance, you actually prefer pretending that you're alone, because you have better performance that way. You quote unquote lone wolf it, but you're like in a relevant area protecting the objective or trying to take one or whatever the fuck, right? And people make fun of lone wolves. Oh, look at that sniper over there. He's a fucking lone wolf doing whatever the fuck he wants. He's not even playing with the team, right? Making fun of your playstyle is kind of what I mean there. If people complain about your essay length posts, that's my dig. If you ask questions that people should be able to answer, but they can't, also my dig. If you care infinitely more than the people around you, and somehow that's made to be your problem, just remember, from me to you, you aren't the problem. You aren't the one that's wrong. You're more than likely the person who we're talking about. You're the competitive player surrounded by the other people who are pretending. And if anything that's been said so far resonates with you, you should really dig into why. You don't have to believe my set of values or my opinions or where I think something is going, but like if the content that I've put out so far, or even just what's in this episode, if that really just makes sense to you, if you kind of get the feeling that I'm onto something, or that you've seen aspects of that too, do a little, of your own research. Talk to a couple of other people and see like how they're feeling. See if, I'm just talking shit. Now, let me do something foreign and crazy as a concept. Change the background picture. I'm about to say a bunch of stuff in closing. This is a fairly short episode. It should be like right at an hour long. I'd like to address something really quick because I'm not changing away from it. This speaks to what I'm offering and what's driving me. The editing for this content might get fancier over time. The inlines might gain some cohesive structure. So, maybe how I pace how I'm talking, or, how I introduce a subject or something like that will get better with time. Hopefully, at some point, I can stop swearing. I think actually this episode, I'm doing pretty good. Sometimes you can tell I'll swear more if I'm just doing like off the cuff. I haven't done the outline as well as I should have. But even in those moments, hopefully I can step away from that, because you really do sound childish and unprofessional to an incredible degree anytime that you swear. But speaking my mind and speaking from experience isn't ever going away. So if you can't parse between lecturing and constructive criticism, you are doomed to fail with whatever you're doing, whether you're running a server, whether you're running a tournament, whether you're running a team, whether you're running just a group of guys. You need to be able to read into a situation and step outside of your own body. And always assuming the worst is basically just always assuming that you're the main character. None of us are the main character, let me tell you. Just to give an example that should resonate with everyone. If you're 20 minutes late for work, what's the difference between an excuse and an explanation? Pause the video, make your guess. Whether the person listening to you dislikes you. So if I'm saying something to you, about you, or for your benefit, lecturing would insinuate that you already know what I'm saying. I can count on one hand the amount of times since I started playing Reforger, that I've talked to a team, an organization, an individual, or a community for this game. Pub servers, competitive teams, people that were trying to do like some PvE, milsim shit, all across the spectrum. And they were able to either refute what I was offering or explaining, or they were able to show that they actually did know what I was offering, but they had just decided to go in a different direction, or they disagreed with me philosophically or something, right? They're like, oh, we took a look at that, but we actually decided that in the long run, this was going to be kind of our play. When I bring something up for debate or conversation in like a Discord setting, for instance, it's because you've obviously decided to not do something that would have been better. So you obviously didn't understand the issue. So it's not really lecturing at that point, is it? And then also a funny like inconsistency, if you are in a team or a community and you see this disparity happen with other people, because I guarantee you it happens all the time. Someone will say, "You're lazy." And then they'll also say, "You put too much effort into everything." Well, which one is it, right? That's a fucking really common and really annoying inconsistency to see in especially leadership, right? When I break something down or I offer big essay-sized posts, in what world is that a negative? You'd prefer I say, like, your admins suck, with your spelled as, like, Y-U-R, with just, like, one sentence? You really don't want me to, like, make a claim and then substantiate it or explain, like, why I feel that way? What are we really talking about? Now, actually, in closing, I claim to have all of this experience. I would offer that I've done a fairly good job. Maybe if you're just a Joe, you haven't seen a lot of what I've offered so far is sort of like leadership stuff, haven't offered much for you as a Joe, so you might not kind of believe me at this point. I'd like to think that so far, though, I've done a pretty good job of articulating and establishing myself and making references to things that I know teams are currently going through and all that good stuff. But, once ARCL Season 2 starts, for instance, and I'm able to start up with a lot of like the analysis content and stuff and pointing to like, this is what this team obviously tried to go for, didn't work out, and this is exactly why. You can see the point of failures here and here. If those things didn't go bad, it really would have just been something else that failed, just as an example. If you have to wait for that content, totally get it. If you're not all in, not all on board, got it. But I claim to have all this experience. I could just annoy people in various discords with my opinions, but I don't. Inherently, even if you don't like me, the opinions that I provide, or what I've set my role to be in the community, you can't say that I just bug people on Discord. I reach out to teams and individuals to gather different takes and stances, experiences, history, lore. And if you're not on a team where they've referenced any of that, it's because your team didn't fucking respond to my questions. They didn't let me in, so to say. I watch 5 to 6 hours of competitive content. Most of it's listening, I'll be honest, because there's not many visual elements, but I consume about 5 to 6 hours a day of competitive content from like Counter-Strike, League of Legends, other professional esports games. Kind of like I said in the little stinger at the beginning of the video, right? Like, if you join our Discord, you can see all of the content in a specific channel where I'm like, that video's got some good takeaways right there. You can see all that stuff and see kind of like what's feeding into me. All about games that are better resourced, funded, staffed than what we'll ever achieve with Reforger. You're talking about people that are making content, you know, culminating in their like 7th or 8th years from being professional casters, like people that are paid to do casting and game analysis, 5 to 6 figures for some of these jobs. So, better minds than me, right? That's all for tournament structure, alternate bracket seating ideas, what the event field should look like, for a given year, etc. And then when I think about an idea or I see something that could be applied to us, or I think about, that probably is not going to work out, like my stance on monetization for Reforger, even if this thing was popping. I chew on it. I sit with them for a couple of days, usually like 3 or 4 days. I think about the upsides, the downsides. I think about the competitive scene 3 years from now as often as I do about the scene a month from now, right? What's going to make this thing last better, right? I always give references to Squad, right? I was in the competitive scene for Squad for roughly 4 years. Yeah, right about 4 years, 5 years. You know, how did ideas and concepts age in that game? Well, those obviously worked well, or these things didn't work well. How similar is Squad to Reforger? We could just pull those aspects into Reforger, right? I put out content where I'm forced to articulate and explain why I feel a certain way about something. My proverbial balls have been on the table for some time now. I openly invite criticism and debate, interaction and tuning. I talk about the good and the bad with various topics. Complaining isn't enough. Asking or expecting other people to do things isn't enough. This should mirror why people on your team or in your organization should want at any point to be squad leads or in leadership positions, right? It's not fun. It's satisfying. It feels good to take what you feel and what you know, maybe some of your experiences from when you were a Joe, and give other people the opportunity to have those same experiences and have that same fun. Especially since with a lot of these games, the honeymoon period ends, right? The gunplay gets stale. You start to look for more to do, otherwise you burn out and you leave the game, right? Well, a really great thing to step into is like, okay, well, it's really kind of hard for me to have fun now, but just because I'm out of my honeymoon period with the game doesn't mean that there aren't 5 or 6 other guys on my team that are still there. And if I step up as a squad lead, maybe they won't have a shitty one. So nobody should want to be in a boring fucking leadership role like that. But you'll come to a moment. It's kind of like deciding that you want a kid or you're ready to be a parent, right? Like, it's the concept or the idea that, you'll feel just really complete on a level that you can't possibly approach any other way when you've raised your kid into an adult and you see when they're like in their 20s or 30s that like they're just really well developed and they're really mature, they make great decisions, they're doing successfully, whatever the fuck. So expecting things to get better but not actually doing anything about it really doesn't accomplish much, right? So even though my proverbial balls have been on the table for some time, it's time to put them out further. So I'd like to announce I'd like to announce that as a completely separate endeavor from Camo Net Supremacy, I'll be hosting my own tournament in 2027 under the Bambi banner. Has nothing to do with Camo Net Supremacy. Camo Net Supremacy is basically like a Discord and a means for conversation for the competitive community at large. And it's kind of YouTube content, right? That's all the idea of Camo Net Supremacy is supposed to be. So, completely separate from Camo Net Supremacy, hosting my own tournament in 2027, probably in like spring or summer. But it'll encompass 3 types of play. Infantry only, where there are no sniper rifles, light machine guns, helicopters, armor, RPGs, mines, no fucking anti-personnel mines. Just a small selection of balanced rifles on a purpose-built and sized map. Well, maps, where the only thing that's measured is your skill as an infantryman. There's no vehicles to flip, there's no supplies to run. You, a chunk of terrain, and objectives to either shit the bed over or dominate. Secondly, single or dual lane conflict, which I'd point out is a concept from Battlefield's Rush and Conquest modes smashed together. So if you think you own that concept as a game mode, good luck with that. The style should offer play like everyone's used to. We have infantry and armor and helicopters in the same space, but with significant restrictions. No rocket helicopters, armor that doesn't have exploding ordnance, and all that good stuff. I will point out that across the board, I'll say a piece on what kind of underpins all of these in a minute, but I've gotten considerable complaints about how the base game handles armor movement, speed. So I would just like to interject real quick before I potentially lose anyone that we will be taking the vanilla vehicles and basically re-adding them back in. So the lav turret will have stabilization so you can shoot on the move, and the drivetrain / engine will be significantly buffed so you don't do 5 miles an hour up hills. And finally, HQC, which nobody seems to be offering for some reason. Don't really get that. If you don't know what HQC is, I can't really help you there. It's a base game mode for Reforger. All of these will also do like pistol only brackets and stuff like that, but obviously that's not like really super developed or whatever. That's just fucking around, right? All of these will run through Ironbeard's escalation mod to enhance the quality and balancing of gameplay. No longer are the days of having a sniper rifle and a light machine gun, one primary weapon per person. Role restrictions, so if you're slotted into being a light machine gunner, you can't pick up that RPG or sniper rifle. Squad restrictions, so you can't just have 6 grenadier roles in your squad or 6 light machine gunners. Deployable radio backpacks. No suppressors. Commander role improvements and balancing changes. So the commanders will actually have a purpose, really. To our knowledge, we'll be fielding event options between HQC and the infantry only stuff that no other tournament host in the space has expressed any interest in addressing. I've explicitly asked people if they were ever going to do an infantry-only bracket. They explicitly said no. I've asked, and many people have asked in the space, if anyone was going to do HQC. Everyone said no. Now, big note, we will not schedule our events, again, 2027 to conflict with other events in the space. But we also aren't going to cancel events when other people decide to introduce those conflicts, right? So if you're a tournament host, let's say obviously no one has anything scheduled for 2027, right? So this should just be taken as a hypothetical example, right? In December, which is ideally and when everyone should be introducing the vague event dates for their tournament hosts or whatever the fuck, right? If in December we say that we're going to schedule an event at the beginning of summer, first week of summer or something like that, say first week of June, and then 3 months go by and no one has said anything to the contrary for their events. And then suddenly someone else says that they're holding an event the first week of June. I don't care. It's not our job to change our event dates. There should be consistency. That's like one of the 3 things that you should master as a tournament host. Consistency, communication, run the servers. That's it. Tournaments really should just be scrimmages with casters. That's it. So, we're also announcing public servers that will run these experiences ahead of the tournament, so people can get a taste for everything. The servers will be hosted in either the UK or New York. Depends on how popular the concept is for European teams and individuals. If there's a lot of Euro teams and people that would really love that, and there really kind of aren't all that many. I say all the time, North American competitive players kind of fucking suck, right? So if it's infinitely more popular in kind of like Europe and UK than it is in North America, we'll split the difference properly and we'll host it in the UK. The first public servers should be the infantry only and HQC servers, since it doesn't seem like anyone has really catered to that part of the player base so far, even in public play. We are currently looking for people to help playtest the first infantry only map. It's got enough variation with the terrain. I've held off on making all of the other infantry only maps, which fucking bothers a piece of my soul, but the first map has a really good slice of all of the terrain types that I would double and triple down on with the other maps. So if we get people to playtest this one map and the data that I get back speaks to whether people enjoy fighting over mountainous terrain or rolling hills or trails and rivers and stuff like that, sort of like natural nature, as opposed to fighting in cities and towns and over buildings and backyards and whatever, then I'm going to take the stuff that people really enjoyed and apply that more to the maps and less of the stuff that people don't enjoy. Should sound sane, right? If you run your own public servers, don't bother with feeling threatened. No one's going to believe me there. Our public servers are aimed at explicitly servicing the competitive community and anyone who wants to give a damn. That's probably only 10 to 15 people that might play on the average current server a month. We're expecting not ticket quotas, but ticket expectations. We're expecting to ban 30 to 40 people a day when we get things up and running. That's how uncommon the constituency and sort of player that we're hoping to provide a space for is, to keep the quality of life and level of care high. We aren't removing people that are bad at the game, but we are removing people that don't care about getting better, right? If you have 700 hours in the game and you're still team killing people in really obvious moments where, like, hey man, the Soviets wear tan. You know what I wasn't wearing? Tan. What you doing? Right. Remove those fucking people who, like, dude, get a grip. You don't give a fuck. Again, I like to say you curate based on buy-in or skin in the game, giving a fuck, and not on hour count or, you know, what team you play with or whatever the fuck. So that shouldn't be a threat to basically anyone that's running a public server. All three servers, again, because it's downstream of what's going to be on offer for the tournament, all three servers should run like quote unquote vanilla plus servers. We're going to call it something to the effect of like vanilla rebalanced, but very small mods and not 30 small mods, right? There's not going to be there's not going to be that mod so you can dig down bushes and trees. That's not something that anyone is really aching for when they play vanilla and they're like, God, this is shit. It's going to be a weapons mod to add in our balanced selection of weapons, which, by the way, is going to be the base AK and the base M4 with... I'm going to have to do a completely separate video to specifically talk about that and the justifications for it and stuff, but it's going to be maybe 2 to 3 additional weapons for each type. So it'll be a couple of sniper rifles for both team to add in addition to the ones that are already in. It'll be a couple of additional rifles and light machine guns and stuff like that. Very ideally small in size for a mod. The maps, very, very small, inefficient. Obviously, like the HQC maps need to be large enough to get the value out of building your own bases and controlling your own land and stuff. But even then, I'd suspect that those will be pretty small in size as well. Most of the buildings by that point, when we start making those maps, I'll already be into Blender, so I'll already be making my own buildings and stuff like that. The buildings aren't going to have furniture. You don't need any of that fucking furniture in there. Dude, kill the people that are in the building and move on to the next building. What the fuck are you doing? So it'll be the maps, the weapons mod, and then escalation should really just be it. So, thanks for sticking with me. This right at like an hour long. We're almost at the start of ARCL Season 2. So I'm sure everyone's tired of just seeing podcast content and interviews from me, and people really wanting to get into the meat and potatoes of like actual match analysis. I'm right there with you. Some days I'm like getting bored. But again, thanks for sticking with me. Join the Discord if you would like to participate at any level in actually having a positive effect on the community.